got UK, Sweden, we got Nigeria, Australia. Wow, all over the
Switzerland.
place. South Africa, Alaska. Yeah, it's really amazing. Every time we do these, it is people from really around the world that are attending, which is fantastic. Love to see
Chile.
that. Chile, we got South America representing. So
New
far, I think we've
Zealand.
hit every continent besides Antarctica. So I think we're in good shape.
There's so many plants growing in Antarctic.
I'm waiting for that one day when somebody's going to say it's what's the name of the station down in Antarctic? Can't remember what it's called, but
Murdoch.
Mc, McMurray Station or something like that. It'd be great.
And with climate change, it may well start growing.
Exactly. The balmy South or Antarctica. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So we do have some housekeeping to go through for today's webinar. Just let everybody know you will be in muted mode. That just helps keep the background noise down to a minimum because we usually have quite a few people attending the webinar. But in today's, we're going to talk about introduction to the panelists. So we'll have a few slides for each of the panelists to kind of talk about who they are, what they do, kind of a day in the life of being a consultant. And then we'll do an audience poll, and we want to know a little bit more from you. And it's a quick poll; it won't take very long to go through. And then really the whole purpose of this webinar is for you folks to ask us questions. Ask us, things like, so what does it take to start a business? What kind of clientele do you have? What is it like, working in this type of agriculture or that type of agriculture? Any kind of those questions about, what we do and how we do it works fantastic for this webinar. So we'll spend about 30 minutes going through Q&A, and then we'll take a short break to talk about the October offer, and it takes about 6 minutes. There's a video and a slide that we'll be going through. And then we'll just pick right back up into Q&A and finish off the webinar with a Q&A session. And we figured today's session will almost run about 2 hours, probably about an hour and 50 minutes. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. And, in order for you to get your questions answered, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if there's a question for panelists, make sure you click the Q&A button. The chat is just really for being able to communicate back and forth with the participants in the webinar. So please try to make your questions that you want panelists to answer in the Q&A, not in the chat session. And I'll bring this back up before we actually get to the Q&A session, just as a refresher. Okay, so let's talk about today's panelists. So we've got Dr. Elaine Ingham. That's why you guys are here. So Elaine's going to start us off, tell her about herself and her history and background. And then we'll hear from Todd Harrington, who has Harrington's Organics out in Connecticut, USA. And we got Renald Flores, who has Flores-Sens systems in Europe. Keisha Wheeler and Casey Ernst, who own Catalyst BioAmendments out here in California. And then myself, I own Sprouting Soil, and I'm also a soil food web consultant out of California. Okay, so let's get started. Elaine, I'm going to hand this over to you.
And then I have to unmute myself.
For sure.
Whoops. Okay, I'm Dr. Elaine Ingham, and we were just talking about this before we got started about how I'm to blame for it all. I got it going some 45 years ago. I can't believe it's been that many years since I arrived at Colorado State University and said, introduced myself to my major professor and started talking about what kind of project they wanted me to do. And I was very interested in any of the microorganisms. I had been playing with oysters and oyster digestive systems and seen that there's a huge selective pressure in your digestive system for unique organisms that promote your health. Well, so, as oyster stomachs go, so human stomachs go and, then what's going on in the soil. And so my major professor had me wanted me to do some work on a that was a different segment of my life, genetically engineered stuff. But it comes to mind because that's what I've been talking about the last couple of days while I was in DC. So my major professor at Colorado State University, Dr. Donald Klein, gave me a project that had to do with assessing the activity of fungi. You know, it's easy enough to look at total fungal biomass, those portions of the hyphae that are growing very, very rapidly and lots of activity, lots of things. Things are not so active, parts of the fungal hypha which are not growing at all and perhaps even bound for death. How important is it to keep track of all of these different parts of the community? Who's growing really rapidly, who's being benefited, who's not being benefited, starting to take off or starting to go to sleep. So I had a specific method, a staining method that he wanted me to test, but one of the first things I asked him was, so why is this so important? And he said, well, look, what I'd like you to do is go around to all of the professors at Colorado State University that teach anything to do with soil. So the soil chemistry department, the agronomists, the hydroponics people, all the, the arborists, all of the various departments that you would think that they would have a very good understanding of soil. And so the first one that I came to sat down and explained my project and said, what do you think? Is this a good project to do for my PhD? So, give me your feedback. And the professor looked at me and said, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but there is no point in doing this research on soil biology because we all know soil organisms are just there. They don't really do anything. And that was, whoa, how can that be that they wouldn't be? Well, wait a minute. These organisms have existed on this planet. In the case of fungi, we can find fossils of fungi in the fossil record back as old as 3.5 billion years ago. Bacteria can be found in the fossil record at 4 billion years old. How can they not be serving a purpose? How can they not be worthwhile looking at? And as I went around to all the other professors at the university, the reply was the same. Oh no, don't take that on. You won't be able to get a job. There isn't any research being done in that area. You're just setting yourself up for working at Target for the rest of your life, or the local supermarket, because nobody has any interest because those organisms are unimportant. So happily I set out. I didn't listen to all of those people. I listened to my major professor, and we started down this road of showing that it is the biology in the soil that maintains health, that maintains the organisms that we all need to eat, that eat our animals eat those things, this whole web of life that you have to understand if you're going to be able to grow your plants in to their the current line is to their maximum genetic potential. You have to be getting all the nutrients that you need from the soil. You've got to be preventing diseases and pests from attacking your plants. You've got to get the organisms above ground as well as below ground. You have to build structure so that the organisms can get down there deep into the soil and keep building, so the roots will come along after. So, just all this set of consequence that occurs because of that. And I'm kind of proud to say that I'm the one who first put that all together. So, have I discovered it all? Have I figured out everything? Absolutely not. We have only begun to scratch the surface. And if you figure that 45 years of working on this and we still have only barely begun, there's a lot of room for all of you in the world of soil biology and how these interactions affect the plants, affect the animals, affect the human beings. Healthy soil means healthy everything else. If we start killing these organisms in the soil, we're going to be in trouble. And so what you need to do is be able to assess the organisms in the soil. So go find a good microscope and start having some fun with it.
You can have a lot of fun with microscopes, that's for sure. I'll raise my hand and say yes.
Yeah.
I lose myself in them.
Oh, I can start, I can have a sample that I've put on the microscope stage and said to myself, now you can only take 5 minutes at this, no more. Now, you got to quit. And you start looking through the microscope and it's like, what is that critter? Oh, this is oh my gosh, look at what's over here. And you finally lift your head up from the microscope and you look, oh my gosh, it's been 2 hours. They are fun. It is fun. So you got to have good control not to get sucked in sometimes.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks, Elaine. I think we'll move to Todd. Todd.
All right. So, thanks, Elaine. I've always been intrigued every time Elaine opens her mouth, and I try to bring my jaw back up to my mouth. So I started a long time ago. I've been in the industry for a few decades. If you, obviously from this slide, you'll see from our website, just talks a little bit about my experience and when I started and my involvement with NOFA and Soil Food Web. And if you want to move on to the next slide, I basically, some of my background, I went to high school, graduated high school in 1983 from Canton High. I went to the University of Massachusetts, Stockbridge Ag, and I graduated in 1987. Believe it or not, I was a professional freestyle skier from 88 to 1992. Did the World Cup and also professional skiing for several years until my body started to give out. And from there, I did some professional extreme skiing in Switzerland, instructing from 93 to 95. Landscape and tree care employee, basically worked for my dad from 1975 to around 1987, 88, roughly. Then I started my own business, and it was probably about 1988. I have here 1987. The original name of my company was called Organic Care. I was trying to find a name. Actually, in college, that was one of our projects, is to come up with a name if we were ever to start our own business. So I thought, I was really into organic, but I wanted to somehow blend the word care. So I thought Organic Care was a great name. Unfortunately, someone liked the name and started using it. So I decided to give it a little, personality, and I used my name. So in 1991, I think we changed it to Harrington's Organic Land Care. And so you'll see on the next slide there, this is actually today's picture of our building. It's about 5,600 square feet building. There's office space and warehouse space where we manufacture our vermicompost, and we have a tea center, extraction center, a lab, and a training center. Here you can see from up above, looking down from our mezzanine where we hold our workshops. This is our general, what I call tea center, where we do extractions. It's a continuous system, so we can keep making extract indefinitely versus doing a batch compost tea, active tea type of system. And I've set up probably about a dozen or more of these around the country and overseas, from small, about this size, to probably 10 times the size of this, depending on what the type of client we have. If you want to move to the next one, you can probably see we used to hold annual workshop, and back in the day when Elaine used to be able to travel more, she used to come on almost annually to our workshops and help teach. And we could only get about 25 people into that classroom, but we'd always fill it, and it was always a lot of fun. It was a 3-day workshop. We'd have what's called compost tea technology, compost technology, and then microscope day. And we spent a day in the lab downstairs with the microscope, and everybody would be practicing under the microscopes. And then we'd have a projector, and we would project what we could see under the microscope. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a great learning experience. Unfortunately, with COVID, we had to stop holding these, and everything became virtual. And so here we are. So as you can see, Elaine, her hair was actually short there. But it was great. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully, we'll be able to do that again. There it is. So we've had a lab since, I think we started the lab in 2006 or 7. And it's really progressed. And we have a full-time lab manager, and we do a lot of testing for commercial, mostly commercial, some residential, and actually we're working with all kinds of manufacturer now, companies that are producing products and compost and amendments and minerals and things like that. So it's kind of neat. And we actually got a grant. We're working with the USDA SARE grant and doing a lot of testing for them. And then in the next slide, we just basically, what are some of my duties? I do all the sales. I help prepare equipment. I'm out in the field a lot. I like to work with my hands. So I manage payables and employees. And I do all the consulting with my clients. I review lots of tests, lots of chemical and biological tests. And then I do a lot of designing and building programs from those tests with my clients. Probably 50% of my time now is doing that, at least. And then I think, is there anything left here? Yeah, so we service my local business, Harrington's Organic Land Care. We service both commercial and residential, including we have a whole bunch of small hobby farmers that we do their pastures, which is a lot of fun for our local business. And then I want to go to the next slide. We the consulting part has really taken off over the years. I've been traveling quite a bit, and there was a little pause during COVID, but now I'm back to traveling again. But between the consulting, the lab, and the products, so we work with a lot of landscapers, tree care companies, farmers, golf courses, schools, nurseries, cannabis growers has been really big lately over the years. Apple orchards, I got a couple really neat vineyards I'm working with right now. Pastures, compost operations has been really popular. Got probably a dozen compost operations I'm working with. I've had quite a few soil food web students that I've been working with from the workshops and the courses. Been working with some research firms, town, state agencies, USDA, NRCS has a grant, and we're working with them doing testing. Working with equipment manufacturers, organic product manufacturers, just to name a few. And so I think I got it all in the time.
I think you have one more here.
Oh yeah, so I thought that was a great question that Sammy asked of us. Is what are the highs and the lows of your career? And I gotta say, probably traveling to the United Arab Emirates in 2001 and meeting the Crown Prince. And saving their date palms. They had a huge problem with the red palm weevil, and instead of being reactive, which we kind of came in as a company being reactive, but then we started digging in the ground and we became very proactive to figure out what the cause was, and the cause was the plants. It wasn't really the insects coming in and destroying them, and that was a really fun project, and I would definitely say that's one of the highs of my career. And probably one of the lows of my career was franchising my business. That wasn't a good move, unfortunately. I learned a lot. It was painful, expensive, but it was a learning process. Other than that, I've been really fortunate to work around the country and overseas and meet some really neat people. And I guess really to sum it up, I just been real fortunate that I got to meet Elaine back in the 90s at one of the Acres conferences. And if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't be where I am right now. And
that picture.
So I guess I do have a slide for that. So I met Elaine, I think it was around 95, 97, Acres USA. And then I started training with Elaine back in the probably early 2000s and got my first certificate. I think it was the I think it was the first advisory certification that Elaine had was in 2005. I had to put my little certificate there. It's a little faded, but the date's still there. And Elaine's signature's still there. Yeah, it's been a great run, and I'm really excited moving forward. There's a lot going on. I got to tell you, it's just really starting to evolve. The industry is really taking off, and I think there's so much opportunity out there for folks that are on this webinar. If they're interested in getting involved in the course, in the classes, being an advisor, whatever. It's just this is the time. Things are really starting to gain some traction.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Todd.
Sure.
All right, Renald, we'll move on to you.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Brian and Elaine. Thank you, all of you, for being there. So my name is Renald Flores, and so I'm the CEO and founder of Flores-Sens Systems. And like Todd, I've kind of used my family name to create my business name, making a little game on the word, because when we talk about the soil, we talk about the flora that is there, and for me, it's the essence, right? And using this nature-based technology as a system in order to provide farmers with transition solutions, because this is what I figured out with my recent years of work, would that be in permaculture or in regenerative grazing and now in large-scale farming, that if we talk about soil health, we also have to think about where are we at this very moment. And most of the conventional farming is about using a whole load of nasty products, and there is a need from these people as to how to transition, because most of those people really have not learned soil microbiology and organic farming. They have learned conventional farming. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm based in my company is based in Geneva, Switzerland. Well, maybe there's something missing here on the slide, maybe because it was yeah.
There you go.
I need to press the
There you go.
the toggle any button. Yeah. So yeah, I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland, and but I'm mostly working in broader Europe. And why Geneva? It's because before working with the soil food web people, I was working in the private banking in Switzerland, and that has been like kind of my starting point about like wondering what was this whole world about. Just like, okay, just making some money and just having some psychotic thoughts about what should be done and what was not be done. And so I decided to just take my backpack and start to learn. Next slide, please. And on that road, I've learned, of course, a little of permaculture and the Savory Institute people, etc., etc. And with that, I have realized, traveling the world, that it was a real need to provide the farmers with pragmatic tools, right? How to do it? How do we take your system from point A to point B if you want to actually get away from the massive cost that it has as to produce conventional farming? And some of you may be farmers, and you may have felt the pain that this year, how the chemical prices have increased and how hard it can impact your business. So by working with these technologies, soil microbiology technology, as I call it, we enable you to get away from the dependency, the addiction that you have on the products, but mostly on your finance, right? Because at the end of the day, we look at the bottom line. So next slide, please. So within this offer that I have in my business, it just provides if the farmer can, because we know farmers are really busy. It's about either giving a turnkey solution, which means looking where you are, what needs to be done. Do you need to decompact your soil? Do you need to inject while decompacting? What kind of compost would you need? How would you produce compost tea? What machine will we be using, etc. The whole sequence of operations. And in the meantime, doing some educational job as well. What are we talking about with soil microbiology? How does that work with plant nutrition? So then the farmers then can just relate with that and make them ours. So also sharing my microscope work and the whole 9 yards. Next slide, please. So as of now, my main clients are large scale, and one of the biggest is in Latvia. The farm is 5,000 hectares doing cereals. Can you just press the button so I can see the whole thing? So I'm working with cereals, beans, onions, and corn as well. So that's kind of taking the whole picture of what the work I'm doing in Europe. And now recently I've started to work on fruit trees on fruit trees, and mostly avocado trees in Spain, now in Tenerife right now. So there is a massive demand, there's no doubt, and also massive need to be addressed as how do we do it. So we're paving the way, and this is what I'm doing. So next slide, please. So this being said, I can say that, okay, going through the off season and the on season, because of course all that is linked with seasons, as agriculture has always been. So yeah, off season, I'm just doing some farmers training, or I'm helping farmers to adjust their compost recipes, or maybe helping them to engage in large scale or small scale composting. So the methodology, the resources, etc., designing the next year's season, and doing some microscope for when I'm bored. But and on season, well, that is when the whole thing just become hectic, and I mean, no weekends, long days where would be just running the project with any farmer, and then microscope in the same time, just making sure the compost is well done, analyzing the data and extending the framework to, well, soil nutrition and etc., like pest management, the whole 9 yards. And that's very, very, very stimulating. And so far, so good. Next slide, please. So, and talking about highs and lows. Oh, right. No more highs and lows.
Sorry.
About you, Brian, now.
Well, you can go ahead and talk about your highs and lows if you want to.
Yeah, no, my highs and lows are pretty straight. I mean, it makes me feel really joyful to see that there is a growing interest in what we do. I mean, a lot of people understand that there is a relationship with the soil life and then the quality of what you eat, right? And then it's not even talking about, you know, the disaster that has caused chemicals on human health. Another high is field results. I have had results as soon as the first season on a small scale. On large scale, we have some hurdles, but we have results. That's no doubt. So on the highs as well, very long hours to work, as much as on my lows, like, okay, very long hours to work. Also realizing that, okay, I'm from some other world, that agriculture, and had to learn my way the hard way. But I have been fascinated to see that, yeah, well, you know, those guys, you guys farmer making the work, and I'm really humbled to see that these people are also feeding the world, and then it needs we need people like you to engage and continue the work that we do. So that's a little bit of the highs and lows here.
Thanks, Renald. Okay, moving on to myself. So I am Brian Vagg, and I own a company called Sprouting Soil, and predominantly we do consulting, lab work, and also remediation, making compost teas, extracts, and spraying and things like that. So a little bit about us. My wife and I, Shelby, we created Sprouting Soil about 5 years ago. And really, a lot of our focus was to inform, educate, and really assist the farming community. And I'd have to say that farming was our main, focus, but I have also quite a few landscape and residential clients as well, because there's a lot of people who are concerned about the chemicals they put in their own yards and things like that. So a little bit about us. Soil food web consultant. We also have a nonprofit here in California called the Sierra Soil Biology Association, which is meant to do outreach and inform and educate the community at large. We have a 5-acre homestead that we have just sold. I'm actually going to be moving up to Oregon, so I'll be putting together a new homestead up there. And I'm excited that the people that are buying our homestead here are very interested in maintaining the same practices. So I feel pretty good about that. My wife and I both had careers in technology. I was more than a couple decades into the high-tech industry, and it was just one of those things where growing and farming practices and things like that was my hobby. The hobby turned into a passion. I think I did what I wanted to do in the high-tech industry, and I was ready for a change, and that's why I moved into working with soil biology. And my wife and I are very passionate about healthy living. So a lot of this stemmed from how on our homestead can I make food as healthy and nutritionally dense as possible. And then once we learned how to do that for ourselves, it was like, wow, we could do this for others. And I want to be able to do this at a large scale as well, which has been great because I'm actually working with a lot of large scale clients at this point. Okay, so a little bit about our business focus. So I mentioned before that we do soil assessment, the lab services, and that's a big thing when you're a consultant. A lot of times you're going to go and do a consulting work, but you need to be able to baseline the soils, and then you need to test the soils as you're doing your remediation efforts just to make sure that things are moving in the right direction. And if they don't move in the right direction, then it's detective work. You got to go figure out why. Why is that the case? And that's where the consulting part comes into play. So it's taking those analysis plus the soil chemistry reports, the plant sap analysis, the tissue analysis, all the different management practices that the farmers use, and looking at those things in its entirety and saying, how can we change these things? A typical engagement for me when I'm working with a client and we review their practices, I really try to bucket the things that they do into 3 categories. Is what they're doing helping or fostering good soil biology? Is it neutral, no harm, no foul, or is there a negative aspect to the soil biology? And what we'll prioritize is looking at those ones that have a negative impact to the soil biology and look for ways to be able to change those practices to push them either into the neutral or positive. Once we have those tackled, we move into the neutrals until we try to get all the practices into something that's optimal or fostering good soil biology. We also offer remediation services. So that's brewing compost teas and compost extracts, that's spraying, doing deep root zone injections. I find for my small, like market garden types of clients, this works very well. For my residential and some of the landscaping, this works very well to do that. For my large scale agriculture clients, it's much easier to set up on farm operations to brew, extract, spray, and do those kind of things. I've also done a lot of work in research and study. I think Todd mentioned this, there's a lot of people creating biological products or products that they're going to use in the soil, and they want to know what kind of impact does that have on the soil microbiome. And so we'll do some studies in that sense to test out their products. And then something that I really, really enjoy is education. I find with a lot of my consulting engagements that I need to educate my clients. Most of the large scale agricultural folks come from a agrochemical paradigm that they're getting from the universities or the county extension offices, their fertilizer salesmen, the PCAs or the agronomists that they're working with. It's all kind of packaged into these programs. And when we come in with the biological aspect, we need to change a lot of that. And if we don't have a grounding set of knowledge of why we're doing the things that we do, it can be problematic. And so I really encourage and try to say, hey, look, part of the work that we're going to do together is for me to also educate you on the soil food web and the principles behind, the nutrient cycling and pest disease control, weed control, and all that kind of good stuff. And once we have that general set of knowledge that's shared, then the farmers really become a partner in that sense. They'll start looking at their own practice and say, ooh, yeah, that's in the harmful category. I need to change that practice. So I think education is a good thing. And I also think educating in large, I actually go to quite a few groups like farmer guild groups, the masters gardeners, and there's a bunch of different groups, and going out there and just doing 30-minute, hour-long presentations on the soil food web and the benefits, and just trying to educate the community at large. Okay, so a day in the life as a consultant, it seems to be almost every day is different, which I really, really love. Coming from the high tech industry where there was a lot of kind of commoditization of work, it would be months and months of doing the same thing over and over and over again. Here, every client seems to have different challenges or issues or things that I need to research or study or apply practices to. So I do feel like my days are very, very different from each other, which is nice. It's a kind of a breath of fresh air for me. But my days could include working on the microscope. In spring and in fall, there's a lot of soil assessments happening. And so there's a lot of microscope work that needs to be done. And some days I will maybe do 6 to 8 hours of microscope work, which is great. I mean, after doing that for a few weeks, you're like, okay, I need change. I'm going to go on to doing something different. Writing reports, I think communication is key, especially in where we're at in this industry. Making sure that the communication that we're giving to our clients is easy to consume, easy to understand, and then to implement is really, really important. Calls with clients, that's a very typical thing, and also doing on-site visits. With COVID, we ended up doing a lot of calls pre-COVID, and kind of now at this point, back to traveling, like Todd mentioned, and going in and visiting the sites and doing that kind of work. There's a lot of research that's involved as well. So we have got to go out and look at all the new unfolding scientific literature that's out there, which is great because this is a very evolving field. We're learning a lot more. And I would say that I think Elaine would back me up on this, that, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg is what we know now, that there's so much more underneath the surface of the water. The size of the iceberg is huge. And so it's fantastic that there's much more research starting to happen in this space. And then there's business admin. So running your own business. So payroll and, doing all your invoicing and all that kind of stuff. So let's see. I think that was it. Just checking. Keisha was not able to join us. Is that correct?
Yeah, Brian, she wasn't able to connect with
Okay.
her phone.
Yeah, so Keisha's traveling at the moment. We're hoping we're going to get Keisha and Casey in here. I'll just make a quick plug for them because I use their products all the time. They are a compost producer out of Northern California. And since I'm based in Northern California, I've got a lot of my clients there. They make a fantastic biologically complete compost that we use in a lot of my client bases to make compost extracts and compost teas. It's a great inoculum source to be able to use. So, unfortunately, we won't be able to hear from Keisha and Casey, but maybe next time we have one of our promotional webinars, we'll be able to get them on board. And you can just see I'm flipping through some of the pictures of their composting operation. Okay, before we move on to Q&A, I would like to go ahead and just do a quick video here to talk about some of the success stories. I think Todd and Renald have a few things in the success stories video. So as soon as we get done with this, we'll kick off an audience poll.
Some of the farmers working with soil food web consultants around the world are seeing remarkable results.
Just within the first 3 years of working with these folks, they saved over $1 million just by cutting back on synthetic fertilizers, going from 200 units of nitrogen per acre down to 150 to even 50 units of nitrogen with the same, if not a better yield, which is really exciting.
If we look at the fertilizer savings across 1 hectare, we're looking at about $1,000 in savings. And then when we look at the increased revenue from the yield increases, we're looking at about $504. So the gross margin was increased by about $1,500. And then if you extrapolate this over 200 hectares, we're looking at about $300,000 over the course of any given year.
You can see the average again, 72%. And if you just take a few of those examples, you can take celery or you can take kale, you can see that we reach over 100% of yield increase.
Basically, the weight gain again was like 25% or more. The only complaint they got was the client wasn't used to obviously bailing as often because the crop was growing so much better and so much healthier. They went from 280 to well over 400 sacks an acre. So that's 42% increase, which is really impressive. I mean, dollars and cents wise, that's a big jump. The peas were really amazing. They were really aggressive with some of the pea projects. 136% increase, that's pretty impressive.
All right, it's always great to see the success stories coming out. And so let me go one more slide. There we go. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll. You should see a window in front of you right now. And the poll is, which of the following best describes you? And if both, please select option A, which is the farmer or ag professional. So we're trying to determine, are you coming from a farmer or ag professional standpoint, or are you coming from more of an environmental advocate? So we'll let the poll run for about 30 seconds or so. And as you guys are answering the poll, we're going to jump into the Q&A session. And so again, just a reminder, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's the Q&A button. If you want a question answered by the panelists, please put that question in the Q&A section. And the chat box is more for just communicating amongst yourselves. And we won't be monitoring that necessarily for questions that will go to the panelists. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of full screen here. And let's get some questions going for the panelists here. And so here's the first question. Don't know who the anonymous poster for the question, which is working in forest remediation, especially after fracking and pipelines. How can we apply soil building to forest soils, which are very different? Right, panelists, anybody want to take that on to start with?
But when we're looking at forest systems, we would always use inocula from the forest floor to go into the compost that we're making. We would want to choose the food resources, increase those sets of food resources that the fungi love, especially the really beneficial fungi. We want to increase the diversity within that soil as best we can. So we might end up going around to 5 to 10 different forests, taking small amounts of that inoculum. And certainly as you start to make your own compost, you're increasing, always increasing that diversity of the forest life. And you're going to select for strictly the beneficials growing by the use of conditions that you learn about when we're teaching people to compost. Root systems are aerobic. All terrestrial plants have root systems that are obligately aerobic. And so you don't ever want reduced oxygens to be produced in the soil, because that's going to help select for the bad guys. So you learn all of these things when we're teaching you how to make compost and make compost extracts and compost tea. So the inoculum of all of these organisms, and trust me when I say we're not putting in 1 or 2 species, it's several 100,000 species of these microorganisms going into the soil. Over time, you'll just keep building and building and building that diversity, so things just get better and better. So we want to make certain that all of those organisms are present in the compost, and that's how we're going to help make sure that we are making the biology in that area the same kinds of organisms, the same diversity that we're adding is what they would have been seen in normal, healthy soil. So we want to work with nature. We want to make certain that we're putting back in everything that nature would have put back in. So your plants never go without food, that every single second of every day, the plant is going to be fed. So the plant, when you think about it, it's the plant that's putting out the exudates that wake up the specific bacteria and fungi to make the enzymes that will pull the nutrients out of the soil, out of the sand, out of the silt, out of the clay, and turn that into bacteria and fungi that have really good amounts of those nutrients present. Predators eat the bacteria and fungi, releasing the proper form of nutrient for the plant to take up right away. And so the plant is going to be fed every second of every day throughout its whole entire growth period with all the nutrients that it needs, which means you are, that we can have the plant be healthy, because it's never harmed by not having all of the nutrients that it requires? How do you keep the soil aerobic, going down as deep as forest trees should go? And that's another point that, so many foresters think that root systems of plants only go a couple inches and then go out sideways. That is a clear sign of a sick dirt. It is not soil at all. And so that compaction layer, the diseases in there, the anaerobic conditions prevent the plants from going down any depth other than just as far as the oxygen can diffuse, and then they grow sideways. Root systems of plants should go down. If you've ever been walking in a lava tube in Hawaii, for example, and as you're walking down deeper and deeper into the ground, look at what's coming through the ceiling of that lava tube. Break off a little bit of that root material that you're looking at, and it starts dripping plant sap. So here you are 100, 200 feet below the surface of the soil up there on top, and you're finding active living growing roots of plants down that far. So they can come that far. When we've worked in Oregon, we have found that the root systems of Douglas fir go down 250 feet without any trouble. So there's so much we don't know. Lots of these kinds of surprising elements that if you're observant, you'll see them and you'll be able to research more on it. How important is it? We've just shown that there's a whole new way for root systems to get more nutrients through the process of rhizophagy. We teach you about all of these things. What do we know? What are the big areas of mystery still left?
Yeah, Elaine, that's fantastic, because it is kind of a puzzle box, right? You got to look at all the different variables that come into it, and then to figure out what's the best way to remediate. For me, I'm only starting to work on some forest restoration projects, and it's very different from agriculture in the sense that the scale is usually pretty large and the terrain can be kind of difficult. Helicopters seem to be our best friend, but hopefully drones in the future will be our best friend to be able to try to apply that inoculum or seeds that we're trying to reseed into that area. I think planters too, people planting trees, can start soaking their roots into compost extracts and things like that. So there are ways to be able to do that. Todd, Renald, anything on forest restoration?
I think one of the things I would just mention is that it's one of the challenges that a lot of my clients have, and a lot of people have, is sourcing out biocomplete material, compost. And so in hindsight, you also got to be aware of all the bugs in the jugs, like Elaine alluded to, is, to get the total food web or get the maximum amount of biodiversity that you need in a project like that, because those are usually more complex food web systems. I think it's really important that they understand those two things, and that that's one of the reasons that we're here. The Soil Food Web organization is here. There's lots of us around, and there's always someone to source out to be able to find those materials, assess those materials, so they can be successful in those challenging projects.
Yeah, agreed. Renald?
Yeah, sure. I would add a simple thing, and it's not really about forest, but tree system. And if we take a tree out of its natural environment, let's take the one system I'm working at the very moment, avocado. Well, think about where the avocado is supposed to grow in nature, right? And what are the conditions that you have to recreate so this avocado will be massively happy and producing and giving its maximum benefit. So applying that to a forest restoration, I guess we have to look kind of backward and just think, what is the forest that we want to replant, and what would be the initial stage in terms of conditions of soil, but also the canopy, the mutualist trees that would be needed to support. Can we go straight forward planting those trees now, or should we have a kind of a sliding strategy with going ahead with small bushes that would just enable the succession to progress. So then we would create the condition, and then the tree that we want to see growing will then be okay in 2 years' time. So I guess it's me saying, like, we have to be very flexible and dynamic in understanding how ecosystem functions. And with the tools that we have, as Todd said, it's a challenge, yes, but there are ways for us to recreate the conditions when tree can actually grow. So that's my little take.
Yeah, I agree that that's a challenge, I think, because, you know, in California, we have a lot of fires and a lot of burning, and there has to be a lot of restoration occurring. And my fear is that, you know, like and I'm not trying to knock the timber industry, but, you know, they have a defined goal of saying, I want to plant a certain tree crop that's going to be good for harvesting timber in 20 or 30 years from now. May not be the best from an ecological standpoint. And so I'm hoping that a lot more of the restoration comes into play, where it's, you know, looking fully at the ecosystem, not just as a cash crop that can come off of that land.
Todd, I know that you had that work at Governor's Island,
Yep.
where you had parts of the landscape that they wanted to be an old growth this, or you know, a different earlier succession, a different. So how did you get, how were you so successful at getting those plots to grow precisely the trees you wanted and not the other trees encroaching in those things?
I had a really good teacher. You know, I took the approach, you know, and you always throw this out there, is that diversity thing. And because it was such a complex polyculture of plants, I took the approach where I'm like, okay, instead of 1 or 2 different composts that were, I would say, defined as biocomplete or acceptable, I went and said, okay, I sourced out like 10, maybe 12. And out of the 12, only about 3 or 4 were acceptable. But at least I got 3 or 4. And they were from very different sources, very different methods. They were mesophilic compost, they were thermophilic compost, there were static compost. There were different types of compost, different types of materials that had a very unique something to it that made one compost better than the other. For example, one might have been just had a plethora of protozoa in the 100 to 200,000, where another one, that one maybe didn't have good fungal numbers, but then I had another source that had really good fungal numbers. So based on all the testing that we did, we were able to determine which compost to use and how much volume of that compost to use to come up with the ideal mix that had all that diversity. And instead of doing 2 or 3 applications, we did like a dozen applications. So we kind of, you know, went above and beyond. But you know, I had the company I was working with was really receptive, and they were very educated, and they, you know, followed the process and the program. And not all clients do that, obviously, but it is important to, you know, follow the process and the protocols, including even the equipment. You know, we had the right equipment that was designed to do this stuff. And so I think it was a collective combination of, you know, the right equipment, the right materials, and also having a good budget. You know, we had quite a bit of money to do this in a very short period of time. So, and Elaine was, she was able to actually come out and take a look at that project. And to date, it's just, you know, phenomenal to see the difference from when we started to now. It's just, you know, and like Renald said, you know, he was talking about succession, and he was talking about the process, and it does take time. When you know, a early successional, you know, we're talking forest now, so that's a very complex food web. And so it's a very late successional, and that takes time. I mean, it took how long, Elaine? Hundreds, thousands of years to get that complex, right? So how do we, you know, we have the tools to speed it up, but you got to have a little patience, because it's going to take a little while.
You got to build the inoculum.
Yeah.
You can't do anything if you don't have the really critically important species to do the jobs.
Right. And that's where we started dabbling with these eco piles, and we were growing the plants that we were making. The compost that we were making, the compost that we were making into an extract or a tea was very specific. We had actual plants growing in that compost for those different ecosystems. For example, you know, we might have had old growth woody ornamentals or trees, And so they were growing in that compost that we were sourcing it out of that compost that was already acceptable and went through the certification. And then we would extract it and apply it to those plants versus, early successional grasses. We would pull that compost out of those plants that were growing in those piles because, you can't, one thing you can't mimic in a compost system is the exudates from those plants.
Yeah.
So when you apply those plants into that material, then it goes to a whole nother stage. The simple sugars, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the lipids. So when you get all that going in that system and then you pull from there and extract it and grow them out, that's when things can really happen a lot quicker. So good example though. Yeah, that was a good example.
Yeah, excellent.
Great. Okay, let's move to a question from Sherry. And Sherry says, many gardeners in my area had their soil contaminated with herbicides from the local city compost. What can we do to remediate the damage / rehabilitate our soil, and how long will it take? I'm a master gardener and I'd like to know how to help gardeners in my area correct this problem. Thanks. And unfortunately, I have some experience with this. Maybe I'll take this one first. So I was actually doing a research project, and on my own homestead, I usually buy a potting soil mix and I add compost into it. And there's a soil product that I've been using for years. And this year I used that product and my study failed and all of my starts from my homestead failed. I mean, in a serious way. And unfortunately, I'd use some of this potting soil mix to put in my seed beds where I plant my carrots and beets and so forth. And that soil for about 4 to 6 months was struggling to grow anything. For me, the way I remediated the problem in those beds where I put that soil was to really apply a lot of compost extracts. And I put a lot of woody mulch in there. I was trying to really pump up the amount of fungal biomass in that space because fungus usually is one of your best tools to remediate contaminations or toxins that you might have in your soil. But it took me 3 or 4 months. The contamination was that bad. And I suspect that it may have taken a lot longer if I didn't already have a really healthy soil food web in my soil. It is possible. And I think contamination of compost or soil products is becoming kind of common. I've heard a lot more folks that are having challenges with this. My recommendation is start buying your products from sources that are doing testing and making sure that they don't have contaminants in their products. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, I've been working with a lot of clients. That's been a major problem. In some clients, they know it, and other clients, they don't know it. And so we will find out after the fact sometimes that, oh my gosh, guess what? Either your compost or your soils have heavy metals or other toxins. And so, as you guys know, there's a lot of methods to help reduce these toxins, both through bioremediation, which is kind of what we do, right, Brian, is the bioremediation part. Mycoremediation, the fungi can do some amazing things at remediating. And then there's the phytoremediation. And we've got a lot of clients that are trying different types of cover crops. And in particular, like hemp is a really good one at arsenic. And we've had a cannabis grower have really heavy loads of arsenic on a field or soil that they were using, and that believe it or not I think it was an apple orchard back in the day. And so there's a lot of different methods, and I think it's a combination of using all these different methods, and depending on your situation, the budget and things like that. But green cover crop, for example, has some great mixes that are specific to bioremediation of heavy metals. So there's been a lot of work over the last decade on these different types of plants that can take in a lot of these or very specific metals, hence the name heavy metals. So, these minerals are heavy, and so they're difficult to get out of the soil, right, Elaine?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So, one of the reasons we like people working with us to have a mentor is that when you run into a problem like this, you notice that here we are in the second year and things just aren't taking off the way they did last year, the first time you applied the biology. And you got to start thinking about what did you add that could have been contaminated. And then once you figure out, you know, what kind of problem it is, how exactly are you going to deal with that problem? And the mentors have been through quite a bit of information on remediation of these kinds of problems. Which bacterium, which fungus, given the conditions that you're dealing with, where did that contaminant come from? You can quite rapidly usually fix the problem. There's usually a bacterial or a mix of bacterial species or a mix of fungal species that will do a great deal towards remediating even any of these problems. I mean, it's more a system that's more commonly used in Europe, where they put mycorrhizal fungal spores on the root system of plants and make sure that those root systems get colonized. As the mycorrhizal fungus pulls nutrients in towards the plant, if a heavy metal or a radioactive isotope or something, you know, any one of a number of different kinds of toxic chemicals are unacceptable to the plant has a way of communicating that information to the mycorrhizal fungus, and the mycorrhizal fungus does not bring those problem compounds into the root system. So they're stored right outside the root system in the mycorrhizal fungi, and they use that fact by digging up, well, they'll cut the top part of the plant and go make it for board feed. And then they dig up very gently, very carefully, the root system of that plant, shake off gently as much soil as they can, and then they go and completely burn that root system, because all the heavy metal or the toxic chemical will now be in almost pure form. And so now, you know, you could use that maybe for medical situations. You can use it in various places. And so you're making some money from the contaminant that was killing your plants. So there are a lot of those kinds of interactions. It's hard to keep them all in your own brain. You kind of need some, you know, a couple of the mentors that are really interested in this part of the information. You want to contact them and describe your conditions, describe the problem, and they'll probably be able to set you down and give you a couple of different quick and dirty kinds of tests to see what specifically the problem is. So you will have success in growing your plants, and you won't be promoting a situation where those toxic chemicals end up in your food.
Yeah, Brian, we've had a few situations over the years where dealing with turf grass, for example, I mean, you want to talk about a lot of chemicals, right? You know, the conventional wisdom in the conventional system is, you know, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, salt-based fertilizer. So if you want to wreck a soil really quick, just, you know, get a traditional chemical program, turf program. But we've also used not only the liquid compost and compost teas and extracts, but we've also, you know, like, you know, when someone, you know, gets poisoning, you have activated charcoal, right? To absorb these toxins or the poisons. And so similar, we have what's called humates and biochar and things like that, that actually help absorb and remediate and kind of retain those toxins. You know, I'm not specifically talking about heavy metals, but, you know, pesticides, in herbicides, insecticides. So that's another thing to incorporate into a program, because I think the question was herbicides, right? Was it herbicides?
It was really herbicides and yeah, contaminated with herbicides.
Yeah. So
yeah,
anyway,
you know,
go ahead.
And I was gonna say, you know, I think also work, you know, I'm sure maybe you're doing, Todd, I'm doing with some of the large scale green waste facilities. You know, unfortunately from green waste, they get what they get. You know, this is coming from residential yards, city park landscapes, can come from agriculture. And so they don't know from batch to batch that's coming in what the cleanliness of that product is. And so one of the things I'm trying to work with them is to say, hey, as we're making your compost, or sorry, as you're making your compost, let's start inoculating with compost extracts, some good organisms to try to help break down some of those toxic chemicals, some of those contaminants. But I'm hoping that there's a paradigm shift. As more and more people start to go biological, the materials of the feedstocks coming to the green waste are going to have less and less of these chemical loads. And so I think it is going to be a shift over time. And hopefully, really, maybe 10 years from now, almost every green waste facility is producing fantastic compost. I mean, that's my goal.
Yeah, and I think there's industries that are making us more aware because of their standards and guidelines, like cannabis, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like California is pretty strict on the flower buds. I think it's like 10, what is it? 10 not kilograms, micrograms. It's really, really low.
Yeah,
And,
micrograms.
Yeah. So it's really low. And because of that fact alone, they're going, okay, where can we find something that's actually this clean? It's difficult.
It is.
But it's making other industries aware of that I'm finding with my clients.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So they don't ever apply to begin with. And it stops being something that we have to worry about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there will be a paradigm shift. And I'm just in the moment while we're doing this transition, it's just really trying to work with the green waste facility folks to, help them, try to make the best biologically complete compost that they can, and maybe identify that maybe they're getting some feedstock coming in, and that windrow over there has a major issue. We can identify it early in the stream and say, microbiology is not growing, it's not composting correctly, there's a problem. And then they might be able to track back and say, I got the feedstocks from these 10 sources, let me go investigate what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be more of that, because really I'm starting to see a shift in that space too, where predominantly green waste facilities is about moving material. It's getting material unlocked, composting it, and getting it off. Now there is a sense of biology. People are asking about this. What is the microbiology in this compost? And once that becomes a priority for them, then they'll start really paying attention and maybe start enforcing from what's coming in that, hey, you're liable if you start bringing me a bunch of just garbage that's killing my compost. Yeah.
How about in Europe? Renald, are you finding that you're picking up a lot of the heavy metals or contaminants in some of the feedstock that you're working with?
Well, on the feedstock, I can't really tell. I had just a story recently about a Danish farmer, and they have been using mercury for seed dressing for decades. Right.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was kind of, common practice. Just like, yeah, we have done that at that level for that many years, right? So, what I can say, I mean, without going into more into your question, Todd, I can say I know that guy has started to apply the whole soil food web approach. And as soon as he has started to just bring the whole microbiology back, he had some very decent results. Well, I have to say he had put a lot of it, but it worked, which means there is a correlation and there is results.
You have to have enough organic matter quite often to keep feeding the organisms. And when you first added the inoculum in there was a lot of death that happened, probably because the concentration of the mercury was so high. Yeah. We see this like in places where they used to do sheep dipping, when they were going to take the hair off the animal, and they wanted to get rid of all of the fleas and the ticks, and they would dip the sheep into arsenic or copper or something like that, and then the sheep would run around, and that whole area of the pasture would be just bare soil all the time because of that. And trying to suck up all those compounds till the soil is finally free of those toxic chemicals. We either have to use a massive amount of good compost with the right organisms in there and do it week after week after week until finally things are done, or we go on for a very long time trying to bring that problem up to where most of those toxics have been converted into the structure of the organic material, or somehow bound so that they are not releasable?
Yeah, and I want to add a little thing here as well. I mean, well, probably it's the same in the US and in any of the so-called developed countries. I mean, how many years of conventional agriculture of bringing in so many products, the one on the top of the other, on the top of the other, on the top of the other, while depleting the organic matter and then destroying the microbiology that could maybe just get rid of that, and on and on and on and on. We can call that just like Molotov cocktails. And then if we don't do a little bit of a detective work before, like what is the field history, we cannot come up with a decent and strong strategy to actually remediate. And that has happened. I know that among my people that has done that, just like first year, just bringing too little of compost and too little of extract or teas, and that nothing sprouted, like nothing, just typically nothing, which was, kind of dramatic, but well, we could come up with some, meeting and understanding that, yes, it was because of those cocktails for too long, and that much more should be brought in so we can regenerate.
And I think, soil organic matter is a key thing. It's typical for me to see in a lot of the agricultural fields I deal with, sub 1% soil organic matter. I mean, fields that are 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. And with such low organic matter in the soil, that it is a big thing. For me, when I'm putting on a program with my clients, we're looking at introducing, the microbiome back into the soil, but also making sure that we get the soil organic matter in the soil as well. It's those two things in principle help accelerate the building that structure and getting the nutrient cycling working and things like that. Okay, anything else on this question?
I think we've beat it to death.
We did. I think we covered it thoroughly. Okay, what I'm going to do is we're going to take a quick intermission here where we're going to talk about the October promotion that we have. It will take about 6-7 minutes, and then we'll jump back into Q&A. So let me go ahead and fire back up the screen here. And panelists, just let me know. Can you see what I'm sharing?
Let's see Q&A.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we have extended the promotion through today, which is October 28th. And, we're introducing in the October promotion a new track. It's called the BioComplete Compost Bundle. And this track is really geared towards farmers, ranchers, and growers, not necessarily people that are thinking about becoming consultants, but hey, they own a farm or they're a rancher or they're growing and they want to be able to take these principles and apply it to their farm. And so what the video that you're about to watch is really going to cover that in depth. And then we also have our traditional track, which is the Consultant Kickstarter Bundle, which is going to be the consultants training program. So those folks that are looking to become consultants and consulting with, like what we do out in the field. And right now, this promotional offer is 45% off of the bundle. And so you'll see it's not just the classes, but it's also Graham Bell's permaculture and a few other things that we bundled into these programs. So let me go ahead and start this video. And panelists, if you can, go on mute.
This October, we're presenting our biggest bundle ever with the biggest savings we've ever offered. With the Consultant Kickstarter Bundle, you can register for the Soil Food Web Foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham for just $38.70, saving over $1,100 through October 21st. You'll also get Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program totally free, saving a further $15.40. That's 26 hours of mentor time dedicated to helping you make your own biological compost and develop your microscopy skills to the standard required to qualify as a certified Soil Food Web Lab technician. You'll also get 2 free bonuses with this offer: the Introduction to Permaculture course by Graham Bell and the all-new Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop with Dee Dee Purshouse, saving a further $500. This is the biggest discount bundle that we've ever offered, with a total value of over $7,000, for which you'll only pay $38.70, saving you a total of $31.70. That's 45% off. There are limited places available with the Consultant Kickstarter Bundle, so please don't delay. In Foundation Course 1, you'll take a deep dive into the science and methodology that underpins the soil food web approach, which was developed by Dr. Elaine Ingham over the last 4 decades. You'll study the history of soil on planet Earth and how the agricultural practices we've been using in the last 100 years have degraded our soils to the point where we now only have around 60 harvests left, according to the United Nations. You'll learn about the solution to many of the problems that are familiar to farmers all over the world today. Problems like diminishing soil fertility, pest and disease pressure, low crop yields, drought, flooding, compaction, and soil erosion. Regenerative agriculture can address all of these problems. You'll be introduced to regenerative practices like no-till and the use of cover plants. You'll also learn about the 4 major groups of microorganisms that drive soil regeneration and how the process can be accelerated by restoring the microbial community or soil food web to your client's soils. Dr. Elaine will present a number of case studies from around the world that she has worked on personally. Here you'll see some of the amazing results that have been achieved using the soil food web approach.
In Foundation Course 2, you will learn all about the importance of biological compost and how it's very different to regular compost. When most people look at compost, they only see a means of delivering nutrients to their plants, so they think about how much nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and other elements are in the compost. When we look at biological compost, we see a means of inoculating the soil with beneficial microorganisms so that the soil ecosystem can start to function again, providing plants with a continual supply of nutrients. This is kind of like teaching someone to fish so they can feed themselves for life, as opposed to just giving them a single meal. In this part of the training, you will learn how to make biological compost using various starting materials to create a recipe that will produce results. You'll learn how to monitor and control moisture levels, aeration, and temperature in order to ensure that beneficial microorganisms are multiplied, while disease-causing organisms are destroyed or become dormant. You'll also learn about the various types of equipment that can be used at different scales, and you'll learn about the different ways in which biological compost can be applied to the soil. In Foundation Course 3, you'll study Dr. Elaine's methods for making liquid biological soil amendments. Compost extracts are used as a soil drench, delivering microbes deep into the soil profile, where they can interact with the plant's root system. Compost teas are applied to the plant's foliage, where they form a protective barrier against foliar diseases. In time, as your soil biome becomes more diverse and vigorous, your plants and trees may be entirely covered with beneficial microbes without having to continually apply them.
In Foundation Course 4, you'll focus on 4 major groups of microorganisms in the soil food web: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. You'll learn how to use a compound microscope to identify and quantify these microbes so that you can really see what's going on in your compost and in the soil. This will give you the ability to assess the quality of your compost and liquid amendments before you invest all the time and effort that is required to apply them to the soil. You will also be able to monitor the progress of the microbial community in your soil over time, so if something is going wrong, you will know about it before the plants start to suffer. This gives you the opportunity to take remedial action early on in the growing season. In Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program, you'll be assigned to one of our highly skilled mentors, some of whom are soil food web consultants who run their own businesses supporting farmers to make the transition to the soil food web approach, and others are PhD biologists who have been working closely with Dr. Ingham for several years. You'll work one-on-one with your mentor to develop your compost making and microscopy skills. When it comes to making great biological compost, there are many variables and every situation is different. Our mentors have worked with dozens of students making compost in many different conditions, so they'll be able to help you address some of these challenges that are unique to your location. They'll also guide you to avoid making common mistakes that can cost you lots of time, money, and effort. Your mentor will support you as you develop your skills to the required standard to pass the microscopy proficiency assessment. Achieving this standard will give you the confidence to really know what's happening in the microbial community in your compost and soil. You'll be able to identify and quantify the 4 major groups of microbes in the soil in about an hour or less. Once you successfully pass the microscopy proficiency assessment, you can elect to be listed on our website as a certified soil food web lab tech, which means that you can assess soil samples for other farmers and growers in your region. You'll have a total of 26 hours of mentor time so you can arrange Zoom calls and exchange emails with your mentor whenever you feel you need help. Our mentors work together as a team, and there's lots of diverse experience and knowledge between them, so you'll have access to a great deal of support.
You'll also have access to the 2 bonus courses. In the Introduction to Permaculture course, you'll learn from internationally respected teacher, author, and lecturer in permaculture, Graham Bell. This is a series of 18 lectures and quizzes where you will take a deep dive into this amazing design system that can be applied when designing your home, garden, farm, business, or community. Permaculture is all about being in balance with the planet and is an ideal tool to have in your bag whenever you're considering making a change. The Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop is delivered by educator and author Dee Pershaus. This 5-session course is all about regenerating the soil sponge for flood, drought, and wildfire resilience. It builds on the successes of innovative land managers around the world who are saving huge sums in damages from extreme weather events and crop diseases, while restoring the dignity and profitability of farming. Dee teaches participatory workshops both in person and online, helping to show the nested relationships between soil health, human health, water cycles, and climate resiliency.
So just to recap, the Consultant Kickstarter bundle comprises the Soil Food Web Foundation courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham, where you get to study the theory and application methods behind the soil food web approach, and that all-important 26 hours of mentor time in Stage 1 of the Consultant Training Program, designed to help you develop your compost making and microscopy skills. You'll also get the 2 free bonuses, the Introduction to Permaculture course with Graham Bell and the Soil Sponge Regeneration Workshop with Dee Pershaus. This bundle is ideal if you want to kickstart your new career as a soil food web consultant. Once you have completed the foundation courses in Stage 1 of the Consulting Training Program, you will be well positioned to complete your certification and be listed as a soil food web consultant on the school's website. With these programs, you'll be on the path to a meaningful and impactful career as the soil food web consultant or biological compost producer.
Hey, Brian, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, everybody. I was talking to myself. I'd just like to be able to mention to everybody that there are a limited amount of spaces still left on the bundles. So if you're thinking about doing it, the promotion does end today. So you might want to hurry up and get your space reserved. And I'd like to be able to see a number of you folks in the webinar today out in the foundation courses and eventually becoming consultants and becoming colleagues of ours. So hope to see you guys out there. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into our Q&A session. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, and I'm going to go into speaker mode. Okay, so let's pull up the next set of questions for ourselves. Give me 1 second here, folks. All right. I have a question here. Let's get into equipment. This could be an interesting discussion. So the question was from Lee, and Lee says, what kind of pump is best to use for spraying compost tea? And I think this is a very much depends kind of thing. Any panelists want to take this on?
Todd.
Yeah, pumps. Boy, I think I could blind myself and rebuild half the pumps that are out there just because, you know, they tend to blow. But yeah, I'll start off. Renald, I'm sure, has experience, and Brian and everyone else.
Yeah.
You bet.
I got to tell you, just pumps has always been an interesting topic. You know, when it comes down to, and I'm sure Elaine will agree to this, is that if you can avoid a pump and still get the material out, boom, that's the best way to do it, because you really just bypassing a pump and being able to do it via gravity is really ideal. Example, you know, irrigation, being able to inject it into a drip system or an overhead is a more passive way to introduce the biology. So if I have a choice, I'm going to pick the most passive way, and that would be gravity. If that's not a choice, then I'm going to go to maybe a pump. And if it's a pump, I'll probably start off with the real, simple electric pumps that are out there with the diaphragms. If that's not a choice, then we go to the mechanical pumps, like the pumps that you see on sprayers. But I always oversize everything. For example, there's different manufacturers that make pump and diaphragm pumps. And instead of a small diaphragm pump, I'm going to go with something that's twice the size. So the motor that runs it, electric or gas, runs at an idle and moves a lot of volume, versus a smaller pump is going to create more pressure to get the same amount of volume. And so we want to try to oversize the pumps that we're using if we're going to use diaphragm pumps. The trash pumps can work too, but the problem with a lot of trash pumps, it's one speed, unless they have a PTO system or it's a electric system that has a variable speed on it. So a lot of times we'll transition and we'll fix a pump that just turns on and off, and we'll put a variable speed on it. So I could talk all day long about pumps, but trial and error. But I think you guys all agree is the most passive pumps are the best. And conventional sprayers are really not that passive, because they're really designed for high pressure, low volume. And really, we're all about high volume and low pressure.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take all the time here. So you guys go ahead.
I agree with you. I mean, in some, you have to think through from when you brew, so you're going to be brewing it, and then you typically have to transfer it to some tank to be able to move it out to the fields. And in some cases, then you're going to transfer it from the brewer to the tank, and that's going to require usually a pump, unless you build your system so that you have your brewers up above and you can gravity feed down into your trailers. So that would be a better way to go. But then you might have the water wagon that needs to transfer it to the sprayer that's on site. And so you have another pump that you got to use, and then the sprayer is going to use a pump as well. And each one of those steps, you're potentially going to be losing biology. And one of the things that we do is we do that testing. We look at what was the biological profile from what is the brewer to what's in the water tank. Okay, did that pump, how kind was it to the biology? And then do the next set of tests, and then identify where potentially you have problems or pumps that need to get replaced. Yeah. And I agree with you. I like the large volume, low pressure. I use trash pumps all the time to move from the brewers to the water tanks, because I don't care about necessarily the pressure at that point. But when you get into the spray rig, having a variable pressure can be very key, depending upon the speed at which you go through the field and what kind of application rate are you trying to apply, and then also where's the spread that you're trying to get to. So there's a lot of those things you have to put into play. But I totally agree with you. Passive is great. When we inject into irrigation systems, I like using Venturi nozzles. You're using the back pressure that's already been created from the irrigation system to then inflow into the irrigation system. So passive is the best. Renald, Elaine, any?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Should we talk about sprayers, pumps, and filters, or pumps to just put the water up? How high? Horsepowers? What's used and all this kind of stuff? It depends, as you said, Brian. Yeah, depends. I mean, I guess it's very context specific. Right. What is your operation? How big is the land? How fast? I mean, how efficient you want to be? And then, I would just be repeating what you guys have said. Absolutely.
Yep, that's what your mentor's for. You have these discussions with them, and then if you need a little more help, you start branching out to other folks out in the field that are doing this already. So, Todd with absolute eons worth of experience, and Renald, who's been working at this for, gosh, how long is it now, Renald?
5 years.
Yep. And Brian, they're all going to be good people for you to talk about what kind of pumps are available to you, what pumps are in your financial range. Let's design the system together. So the one person to not to call is me.
Like, nope, don't.
Don't
do it.
make me, because it's just too much.
I agree. Yep. All right. Anything else on this topic before we went on to another?
You know, I think the only other thing that's really important here is that, you know, you can use all kinds of pumps or methods, but if you don't have a really good cleaning, disinfecting program in place, then, you know, you can really ruin each batch as you go along because you're not cleaning and disinfecting properly. So, you know, when you talk about pumps and hoses and valves and all those other things, is that, well, how do you clean them? You know, we don't have little gremlins we send in there to clean. It'd be kind of cool, but we don't. So, you know, you got to know how to clean and disinfect these pumps also. So that's really important.
Yeah.
To mention.
Yeah.
Okay, Renald, anything else you want to add?
No, absolutely. The cleaning part is so much important. Just, I mean, you design a brewer or some spraying device, and then you spend the same amount of time that you have sprayed to clean the machine, and that's absolutely inefficient. I had learned that the hard way.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have to make do with what we have with a lot of our clients.
Yeah.
But when in doubt, if I can build something from scratch, it's so much better and so much easier to clean and so much less time.
Yeah.
Because we understand what it takes to make a brewer or a sprayer for biology. And unfortunately, they just, you know, you can't just, you know, go to Amazon and buy one. But, you know, there's certain components that are really important, you know, just little things with pumps, sprayers, and hoses that are really important. So that's something that we can bring to the table as a group in being involved with the Soil Food Web.
Yep.
Yeah. Agreed. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to another question, and this is going to be a little bit related to equipment as well. And Pamela asked, it seems to me that putting biology into a drip system is not a good idea. Talk about anaerobic conditions. I think putting humic acid makes sense, but not live critters. So I have an opinion on this. I'm assuming a lot of you other folks, but panelists, anybody want to start off?
Well, you know, we were already talking about pretty much the same topic, but what's really important is it's flowing with the water system, and so it's not going to go anaerobic because it's in motion, you know, and it's passive. So your whatever drip system or irrigation system you're using, and like you said, Brian, you're injecting it into the system. Once it comes out of the emitters of the hoses or the tips and gets onto the leaf surface or in the soil, what's been in the hoses, and it's flushed. It's constantly being flushed out. Right. Versus if it's a batch system and it's being stored in there, yeah, that could be a big problem. But we're talking a delivery system that's continuous.
Yeah. And when I work with clients, we create a practice of you start the irrigation cycle, which is clean water, to start the infiltration into the soil so that there's a good inflow going deep down into the soil profile already. And then partway through the irrigation cycle, we inject the compost extract. And then I typically use the last either half or last third of the irrigation cycle of just running clean water through the system to just continue to flush that all the way through. And then there are ways, you know, at the end of the season, you can, you know, run a lot of my clients will use a peroxide-based cleaner in their irrigation lines. And you don't use them very much. It's very diluted, but it does enough to be able to take any of that biofilms that may have built up inside of the lines. And really, I mean, that's the best way to make sure that your lines stay clean and don't go anaerobic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add to this?
No.
Much easier
Nope.
topic.
yeah, totally. And I love going through the irrigation system. I have a question in here that I think is going to relate to this discussion, but the less that you can have tractors out in the field doing the application and the labor that's involved to run those tractors, the bigger benefit. So using in the term that gets commonly used is fertigation. It really stems from the chemical fertilizer. They call it fertigation, but in the same sense, we're using a fertigation type of system to introduce, you know, biology into the system through the irrigation lines. Okay, so this question, this next question kind of relates a little bit to this, which is from Paul, and is, how do we use no-till to keep a living root in the soil and not compact the soil? I use a tractor to no-till, but it seems that it compacts my soil. Anybody want to take that?
He uses a tractor to
To do
no-till?
work. He's in a no-till system, but the way I'm interpreting it is that he still has to use his tractor to harvest, to do other things, right, in that field. And it feels like, well, I till to try to break up compaction, but then if I'm in no-till, I'm using my tractor on my soils. Aren't I compacting it? How do I remediate that compaction? So,
Yeah.
sorry, Paul, I'm interpreting what you were really meaning in that question. So hopefully that's exactly what you were asking about.
Well, I can relate, and probably Todd can as well. And I will just mention a story that I've been told by a machine engineer, German, working in the farm in Latvia. And he was telling about how the whole harvest in the old days was so critical to design, so to have the least amount of traffic on the farm, which means I heard that as, okay, it's a battle plan. You have to be there on the same time as the combine, and you pick up here and here and here, and that's the way we do it, right? And everyone is aware and why we do it. I mean, I may be a little naive here, but on going along that road, I know that there's some tools that some farmers use, like such as controlled traffic farming, which are helpful to, you know, organize this whole thing. So yeah, let's think about that in terms of what should I do or should not I do so I compact the less, because I agree at a certain level we are recompacting a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's why I like to use different kinds of perennial plants, or, you know, if you don't have a group of perennial plants figured out yet, you use annual plants. And you establish those plants out in the field on all of your surfaces that are going to be bare. So that if you drive across them accidentally with your tractor, the whole plant's not going to be killed. It's going to come back and continues to put the exudates into the soil, so that the bacteria and the fungi, protozoa, and nematodes continue to rebuild soil structure. Structure in the soil, the ability for water to infiltrate or oxygen to infiltrate, or roots, requires these living organisms in the soil to constantly maintain. If you kill these organisms off, then you don't have a workforce that's doing that job. And that means you're going to have to try to do it. Well, good luck. We are really abysmally poor at being able to bring back structure in our soil just with our equipment and just with our two hands. So get the biology back into the soil. And anytime you've driven down the driving rows, you know, let's try to please keep in the driving rows. Don't drive off across your field just for the joy of, I don't know what. The only places then where you've compacted by driving on them, do you have to do some work of applying another compost extract or applying some compost. You know, if you're just first starting, going from chemical into biological, I'm gonna want to till that field for the last time ever. Because as soon as you inoculate those organisms back into the soil, and I usually lay down a really good layer of compost or extract in front of the compost, in front of the equipment. And then as you pass over it, you now are mixing all of those organisms. All that organic matter is breaking up, being broken up by the tillage equipment. So yeah, you're killing 50% of the organisms you just added to your soil, but 50% of them are left to start this process of building structure. You'll come along afterwards and you'll apply extracts As soon as the seeds germinate and start to grow, you're going to be applying teas so that the surfaces of your plants are being being covered by these really good sets of organisms, between having really good nutrition coming from the root system, because you got all that biology working in the soil, and you've covered everything above ground with really good biology. There is no way for a disease-causing organism or a pest to be able to even locate your plant. So all of these things that the biology does, every step along the way, you want to be checking with your microscope and making sure that the biology, the aerobic biology, is winning. So we have indicators that we teach you what they look like and what they mean. We teach you that if you're seeing more than 1 or 2 of these per drop of your sample, nature's trying to tell you that you haven't completed your job. And so your job is then to get out there and finish the job of bringing these organism numbers up to where they should be for the plant that you want to grow.
Yeah, I second what you were saying, Elaine, about getting the microbiology in there, because really, when I tell my farmers, every time you drive a tractor over there, it's just a level of disturbance. The more that you have the microbiome in the right shape, it will be able to repair that disturbance. If you don't have the microbiology there, then yeah, we'll compact and compact and compact. And I like having, like you said, having a cover plant over there. I mean, what I think people don't realize is some of the most compacting events you're going to run into is rain and irrigation. It's the force of water hitting the bare soil. It's a problem. Having a cover, yeah. And people think a drop of water that can't compact. Well, you're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000, million drops of water hitting that surface of the soil is going to compact over time. But having cover plants and having some kind of mulching or green mulch or brown mulch or something like that to also protect the surface of that soil is key.
Yeah, absorb that pressure, absorb that energy so that it's not flattening your soil. Yeah, the top of that plant is going to be pushed down, but then spring back. So plants are much more resilient than your soil is to that effect of raindrops.
Exactly. Yep.
Brian, some of my clients have big, huge farm equipment, and even in the conventional companies or processes, they have the big giant track machines instead of wheels.
Right.
And those tracks take a lot less pressure in one area. They spread out that weight, and they have giant top dressers. They have planters. Even the harvesters have track machines, so they know that that's caused problems. Plus, we're kind of being broad here, because if we're growing in rows, or are we growing in fields, open pasture style, or are we if it's a tractor, then you're not going to compact the planting medium or the row per se, or maybe you might alternate every year or two and you switch it, and then you either cultivate the rows, the tractor tire rows, the following year, but you're not damaging the planting area if you're using a tractor per se, if you're doing it in a row system.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Not being real specific on when it comes to the tractor thing.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes they don't have a choice. They have to use a tractor. But.
Right. I mean, in today's, agriculture, tractors are important. The mechanization of harvesting and doing other things on the farm is important. And if we can take tilling out of the equation, that's great. That's a huge step. And I like what Renald was saying, just be very mindful. And I tell you what, farmers are some of the most pragmatic people I've ever met in my life. And they don't willy-nilly say, "Oh, I'll just drive another tractor down the field. I'll drive," because that's labor. That's, maintenance hours on their equipment. They themselves are going to be trying to find out what's the most efficient way and the least amount of passes that I need to make on that field. And you just play into that. It's like, yeah, we will optimize the amount of time that tractors are in the field. And that's why I like the, fertigation or inoculating through irrigation systems is a good way, because that reduces the amount of time that tractors have to be on the field and so forth. Okay, anybody else on this question before we move on? Okay, here's an interesting one from Louise. And Louise says, my house was built in the 50s over a wetland which was filled with rocks and clay, topped with a thin layer of topsoil. I planted peach and pear trees into this, and they are struggling, fighting diseases, Can I save them? If so, how? I like to start on this one because I've dealt with this in a very similar type of thing here on my homestead. So when we built our homestead, it was a very conventional in my mindset. I wanted to have a lawn in my backyard, and my land is sloped. And so we had a bulldozer come in and basically scrape all the topsoil all the way down to bedrock in this one area that was so we could flatten it out and have a lawn area. And then we added, I mean, probably an inch of topsoil and then put turf on top of that, right? Just the sod. And that lawn was awful and horrible. And this is way before I got introduced into soil biology and things like that. I was going out there applying fertilizers and doing all the wrong stuff. And that lawn was awful. In the summertime frame, it couldn't hold water. It would dry out, die. It had a lot of disease issues and so forth. As part of my change into who I became here in the homestead, we went into permaculture, and I wanted to take the lawn out and I wanted to put a food forest in. But here was my problem. I could take the sod out, but I was right back down into bare rock. So I did some things. I put some hugelkultur trenches in, and I applied some soil and compost and a lot of mulch material. And I dug down the bedrock to plant the trees and so forth. But I tell you, the minute that I really started to do soil biology and put in extracts and teas and try to get the microbiology set correctly, everything in that food forest absolutely thrived. And in fact, on this homestead, the most productive growing space I have is in that food forest, which is by far the worst area of land that I had on this property. And it was just because I was very mindful about making sure that I was adding organic matter, getting microbiology to build structure, and then provide all the right nutrient cycling. And at this point, that food forest takes care of itself. I really could probably walk away for 20 years and it would just continue to keep on thriving. So don't get discouraged thinking, it's this horrible land, I can't do anything with it. You can remediate it and you can make it into actually a fantastic producing area.
The fact that I think it was Louise was her name, that it was a swamp basically. Maybe a lake that was filling in, and they just add a little bit of gravel, rock, and then a little bit of soil on top of that. She could well be having water backing up, puddling. Especially if any time in the springtime when she's got lots of rain, she can see the water sitting on the surface. That means all of that soil is anaerobic. It fills with water, it's waterlogged, it's going to go anaerobic, and most of your macronutrients are going to leave the soil or dirt through volatilization, turned into a gas and blows off. And so she needs to check that out. She needs to find out, where the compaction is in that area, and if in the springtime it gets fully wet. So dig a hole and find out where the water level is through the whole entire growing season. She may have to really work on punching holes through that compacted layer that is keeping the water in place, holding it back from being able to drain normally. So she's got a little of experimentation, a little bit of looking at materials and trying to figure out what's going there. So again, work with us, get hold of one of our consultants, and they're definitely going to be able to help her figure out very rapidly what's going on.
Agreed. Todd?
Yeah. So, microbes can only do so much. We have a lot of projects, especially with schools and athletic fields, where certain parts of the fields don't drain. So that's a physical thing. And when you're dealing with a physical issue or challenge, you've got to address it with drainage. Creating a tile system, like, we have some farmers that have put tile systems in, drain systems, schools or some of the athletic fields. We've got to put drain systems in. Even some of the residential properties have had issues where the soil has been so damaged or so toxic that we've had to, because the water does not drain, because it's a physical thing, no matter what you do, you have to relieve that water issue, and you've got to create a drain system. So you got to, we have a company that we'll call, and they'll come in and fix the drainage issue. And then we'll come in and, if it's like a landscape, a home lawn or something, we've talked about this on webinars before, is where we do that core aeration, put lots of big holes in, and then we will, put that sand compost mix in, and maybe biochar, maybe the humates, and put it on our program. And it's a process. It just doesn't happen overnight. But you have to, the number one thing is to resolve the drainage issue. Like Elaine alluded to, is it could, those kind of situations, usually it's a drainage issue. And
a lot of the times we can solve the drainage by getting the right microorganisms to build structure in that soil. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes you've got the bottom of an old lake, and it's X number of feet deep in clay, and it's formed a permanent seal. You're going to have to get some equipment out there and find a way to build an outlet and let that water table escape.
Agreed. Renald, anything you want to add to this? Okay, see, I'm new, but that's all right. Yeah. All right. I say let's end it with this last question. And Elaine, this one's geared right for you. And the question is, Elaine, what are you most excited about doing next?
Oh boy.
oh boy.
Well, let's see. One that comes immediately to mind is we want to add microarthropods into the communities of organisms that we're monitoring all the time. Most of the microarthropods are highly beneficial for your plant, but of course there's always those ones that are indicators from Mother Nature that things are going badly. Your soil is getting converted into dirt. And so you want to learn recognize what those are. It's like aphids on the surface of your plant above ground. People, oh, it's a pest, it's just horrible. What are we supposed to do? Well, it's Mother Nature telling you that you have a very specific problem down in the soil, and you're going to need to fix that. So you've got to find out where the compaction is. You've got to find out why the roots aren't going as deep as they are, or as they should be. So, one thing leads to another. And what we want to do is a bunch of experiments and find out exactly what each pest is Mother Nature is trying to tell you something about, because it is that specific. So lots of work to do. It's not like all of us, now that you've met me and you're, learning all of this stuff, it's not like we know everything. But see, God does not want you to be bored. And so we've put all of these obstacles up for us to try to figure out, and we are smart enough to get it figured out. But we work with nature when we do that. We don't come in with a bunch of toxic chemicals. We have a no nuke 'em approach, because as soon as you start nuking the bad guys, there's no way you can avoid nuking the good guys. So if you would rather go swimming or fishing or golfing or whatever it is you want to do in the summertime, and instead of doing fun things, you're going to be out there trying to kill bad guys and ignoring the message that Mother Nature is sending you, you're just leading up to worse problems. Because if you don't pay attention to Mother Nature the first time she sends a message, what is she going to do with the second message? Yeah, something nastier. And what if you don't pay attention to the second notice? She's going to do something even nastier, to the point where you will not be growing food. So pay attention to those messages. Well, then that means we've got to learn what each and every message means. That's what we've done with the bacteria and the fungi and the protozoa and the nematodes. We have a pretty good idea what these indicator organisms are, but we want to bring on board another set of organisms that we can get real specific about. What does it mean when you see rust mites, or some other what was the moth we were working with on Stanford University?
Well, that was a tussock moth. Yeah.
Yep.
Tussock moth, navel orange worm. There's all kinds of, yeah.
Yep. And what does each one of them mean? And so we've got to figure that out. Another one of the really interesting things that I just got back early this morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, from about a 3-4 day stint in Washington, D.C., going around and presenting information to the different the senators and the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. about what we're doing in regenerative agriculture, and how, we're all of these things that we are showing you today is the same kinds of things that we were showing to the Congress people. And we had a National Press Club presentation on Wednesday afternoon, and there were 2,000 people in the audience, all of them interested in learning more about the biology. And okay, so now what are the aspects? How exactly do you define soil health? What are the things that you can quantify? What are the things that you're looking at? And so you can see where we haven't even gotten the microarthropods on the list yet. We've got work to do. So don't imagine for a second that there is any lack of jobs. And especially as we get going with the governments of the countries around the world, and countries are at the governmental level, they're starting to realize that this is the way to deal with too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. No other way will function, will take the CO2 out of the atmosphere, that drawdown. But as I was learning from my cohorts that were present at these meetings for this last week, you can't be concerned with just the drawdown. You have to be concerned with what are the emissions going on right now, because if the emissions that we're causing are greater than what we're taking down into the soil, we aren't ever going to get out of this. So we got to be doing both things. And how much is the biology going to be important? We've got to work with nature, not against her, in all of the solutions that we find. So stay tuned. There will be more.
That's for
Let
sure.
me add something to that.
And me too.
Don't forget, Elaine has lots of tentacles out there. That's us soil food web guys that have been doing this, and all the newbies getting involved. And we are also doing lots of research with microorganisms and macro and microorganisms. For example, I've been doing a lot of work with both macroorganisms and looking how they digest carbon, and getting, and I can't really be too specific right now, but there's certain macroorganisms that we are getting a fungal to bacterial ratio of almost 100-to-1 because of a very specific macroorganism, the way it chews on heavy carbonous materials and decomposes it through a mesophilic process. It's fascinating, and it's it's a product that's going to be, it's a type of compost, it's a type of system, but it's just fascinating that Elaine has got people like myself and Renald and Brian and many, many others. We're doing our own experimenting by doing, and because we have all these tools she has given us to be able to do this research with our existing customers, and we're seeing what's happening by implementing these processes and the science. And another thing is aquaculture. We're looking at the fluid of aquaculture, not the hydrolysate, but actually what freshwater diatoms and freshwater systems, and introducing it into our extract, and we're seeing some fascinating things happening. So there's a lot of cool stuff that we're doing, and some of it's trial and error. We just started putting stuff under a microscope. Oh my gosh, look at all these diatoms, and look at how they're feeding the rest of the ecosystem. And hey, let's just start adding this stuff to it. So it's an ongoing process, but because we are a collective group, we share a lot of knowledge together, and we have a lot of experience collectively. Right, Elaine?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Renald will give you the closing thought.
Yeah, well, so I don't know how to put that, if it's something philosophical related to soil microbiology or not, but the story of agriculture is also linked to a story of industry, right? Which means after the Second World War, they had a war industry to change, to transfer, right? And yes, some clever guy remembered that, nitrogen, P and K was early discovered that plants would react on. And so we transferred this war industry into agriculture. So basically we do war with the food that we grow. But the bottom line is, okay, if we want to change the paradigm, we also have to think, what are we going to do with those massive companies that are hiring so many people around the world? We can say, yeah, let's all stop chemicals and stuff like that. But there is maybe a broader ecosystemic studies or research to be done on how do we actually make these guys to maybe engage in some sort of transition. Because if we don't do that, we're going to keep fighting them, right? And that's kind of the maybe closing word. If some of you guys are willing to put their heads into that, I'm happy to review the work.
We got to work worldwide.
For sure.
Because we can't do this just in the United States. But I do want to point out that I think that the rest of the world is actually ahead of the US.
Agreed.
We are pesticide central here.
Yeah.
Just like Ghostbusters, who are you going to call?
Monsanto. No, just kidding. Okay, I think on that closing note, I like to give some thanks. I like to thank first all the attendees in today's webinar. Without your guys' interest, we wouldn't be here doing these kind of things. So, and I really hope that we start to see some of you out there taking these courses and also becoming consultants and doing the good work and putting the good fight. I also like to think there's a lot of people who work behind the scenes to make the Soil Food Web click, and especially these webinars, and to keep us on track. So I like to thank everybody who's working behind the scenes and keeping us on the right path here. And thanking our panelists. So Todd and Renald, totally appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge, your experience, and your resources, and being so generous with that information. That is fantastic. And Elaine, can't thank you enough for all the work that you do, the mentoring that you give to all of us, and the inspiration that we get from you. This is fantastic, and it keeps us going for sure. So
thank all of you so much, because I wouldn't be able to keep going if it wasn't for you guys keeping going. Exactly. It's self-feeding, isn't it?
It is. It's the Soil Food Web of ourselves. It's very regenerative. Okay, with that, we are going to go ahead and close today's webinar. And like I said, I hope to see you folks out there. All right, everybody.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Ciao.